The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify to the light. And this is the testimony of John. When the Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to him to ask him, "Who are you?" he admitted and did not deny it, but admitted, "I am not the Christ." So they asked him, "What then are you? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." So they said to him, "Who are you? So we can give an answer to those who sent us. What do you have to say for yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of the one crying out in the desert, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as Isaiah the prophet said." Some Pharisees were also sent. They asked him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ, or Elijah, or the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water, but there is one among you whom you do not recognize, the one who is coming after me, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to untie." This happened in Bethany, across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord. This Sunday's Gospel is very much like last Sunday's Gospel. Last Sunday was St. Mark's version of John the Baptist sort of being introduced to the world in the Gospels. And today we have St. John the Evangelist and his version of pretty much the same story. One line of which is in both of them, "The one who is coming after me, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to untie," and words to that effect. St. John is a very important figure in salvation history. He is considered to be the last of the Old Testament prophets because he prophesied the coming of the Messiah, but he was given the great honor of being the man who would introduce the Messiah. He introduced Christ to the people who were coming to him at the River Jordan. So Jesus later on in the Gospel says, "No man born of woman is greater than John the Baptist." So he's very important. And since this Sunday's Gospel is so much like last Sunday's Gospel, I'm going to begin this Sunday's homily the same way I began last Sunday's homily down the street. The world is insane. The world is very, very broken, is insane. I'm not just talking about the wars and terrorism and what's going on in the Middle East and now in Russia. I am not just talking about crime or the weird weather patterns that are developing now. What I'm talking about is things that after 2,000 years of Christian history, we're at a point where crazy stuff is happening. One small example would be Pope Francis. Pope Francis talks a lot about the poor and how the world needs to be more caring for the poor. Radio show commentators call him a Marxist because he, like Jesus, talks about the poor. I can't remember who it was, but somebody from Congress simply, when he was talking about capitalism, much the same way Pope John Paul II did, basically said, "Oh, he just doesn't know what he's talking about." Like, poor dumb little priest, he might be Pope, but he's just really out of his league talking about this stuff. It's like, oh, really? But stranger stuff than that is happening. the rise of Satanism. The Church of Satan has grown in this country to the point where they want to be recognized as a denomination. When I was a kid, we knew that Satanists existed, but it was all very clandestine, and nobody knew who was into that. Now, they're out in the open. Did you know that in Tallahassee, Florida, the Church of Satan sued to have a statue of the devil on display in the state capitol next to the manger? And they won. Satanists are suing Christians, and they're winning. The world is insane, and so much of it is insane. How can it be that in 2,000 years of living the gospel of Christ, receiving his body and blood in the Blessed Sacrament, how could we be at a point in this time where the church is so diminished in people's attitudes? You remember back in the 50s, some of us remember the days when Bing Crosby would play priest. How many of you have ever seen Going My Way? The Bells of St. Mary's. You know, the church in Hollywood back then had a certain sort of preeminence. Nowadays, the church is an object of ridicule or suspicion. Those Dan Brown series and so on. Of course, the scandal did not help us one little bit, but before the scandal ever came about, the church's standing in American culture had already been diminished and is being further diminished. Is the devil winning? I must ask myself. So when I was thinking about St. John's Gospel and what he has to say throughout the course of his Gospel, I was reminded that in St. John's viewpoint, you have the kingdom of heaven and you have the world. Now, when St. John says the world, he's meaning not heaven. So you have the kingdom of heaven that is ruled by God, and then you have not heaven, which, as St. John tells us, is ruled by the devil. The devil works to divide people, to get people apart, especially the faithful, to cause divisions in the faith, divisions among people everywhere in the world. That's why we have so many problems. It's because the devil is running footloose and free. Another quote from, or a sentiment from Pope Francis. So what is it about not heaven, the world, that we should be on the lookout for? When we think of the world, I think most of the time we're thinking about this big ball of dirt and water that flows through space, and it's got billions of people on it, and all the plants and animals and all the rest of it. But we should look at the world not only as Mother Earth upon which we live and depend, but also from that spiritual aspect that St. John looks at it. And all of the not heaven activity that takes place in the world isn't because demons are running around with pitchforks stabbing at people. It's because people are not paying attention to what the Gospels tell us. Jesus says, you are in the world, but you are not of the world. We are called to be of the kingdom of heaven. If we are of the world, then that means we are of the devil, and we are at bumping heads with the kingdom of heaven. So we have to stop and think, well, what does that mean? What is it that causes divisions among so many people? If you look at it, the kingdom of heaven is a very positive thing in the cosmos as far as St. John is concerned, and the world, or not heaven, is a very negative thing. And I believe that a lot of the problems, if not all of the problems, come from negativity in ourselves, in people. We are called as Christians to bear fruit for the kingdom. That means drawing other people closer to Christ. Now, if somebody knows that we're a Catholic Christian and we go to church on Sundays, but we have a very negative attitude, we're always gossiping or backbiting or whatever, we have bad attitudes about this group of people or that group of people or that politician or this group of people in their political view, whatever it is. If people know us to be Catholic and also we present to them a very negative attitude, then we have just shut down the possibility for that person to come to faith. Who would want it? I have told you many times before, we must learn to be joyful in our faith so that others will see what we have and come to want it too. But that means that we have to have positive attitudes. We have to examine ourselves. If I am negative, about what am I negative and why? And start to try to convert yourself. Even if you're not a negative person, we still have to be wary about the negative influences that are in the world around us. I'm usually consider myself to be pretty positive and optimistic about things, but I am as susceptible as anybody else to the negative influences that are in this world. They are in our cities, they're in our politics, they are within our parishes. These negative influences that do what? They divide. And as soon as we start being divided, that's when Satan has begun to win. Jesus promises us that the gates of hell will never prevail against his kingdom. So those of us who live in the hope of the resurrection, those of us who receive the body and blood of Christ on a regular basis, we must be careful of what face we present to the world. Because just as St. John the Baptist was the first person to introduce Christ to that people who were gathered around the River Jordan that day, in our time, we too must be introducing Christ to the people around us in our day. We can only do that if we are in touch with our souls, our spirits, and that we have that positive energy that comes from the grace of God to flow out through us and from us to others. If you're a negative person, negative people need to stop and think about what they're presenting to the world. You're not presenting Christ to the world if you're always negative. You're presenting not heaven, the world, to people in the world. Who do you want to work for? The ruler of the kingdom of heaven or the ruler of not heaven?